Hello and welcome to the National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar, Hitting the Road for the Holidays, Are You Trip Ready? My name is Jerome Carslake and I'm Director of the National Road Safety Partnership Program and its many activities. To find out more, please visit the NHP website, register for our newsletter, or even follow us on social media such as our LinkedIn page. Today's session is going to go for approximately 60 minutes with plenty of time for discussion throughout. We're going to be recording this session and it will be shared on the NHP website, plus we'll shoot out an email with a PDF and a link to it afterwards. Oh, and there will be a survey in there as well, which we'd love to hear your feedback on how we've gone to always improve. So, as I mentioned, we want to make this webinar as interactive as possible. So please add your questions in, typing them into the question box here. Give us a bit of a record as well, in case something goes wrong or we can follow up. And there is a chat box, so feel free to throw a few thoughts in there. And our speakers are very keen to hear from you. So now let's dive on in. There's going to be 2 points after each of the presentations for questions and a panel discussion at the end. So now to our amazing presenters. We have 3, and we're very lucky to have Wylva Hall of Campervan and Motorhome Club of Australia. Morning, Wylva.
Good morning.
Wylva is a project coordinator for RV Safe, a road safety initiative specific to the RV industry and backed by the federal government Road Safety Awareness and Enablers Fund, and the Campervan and Motorhome Club of Australia, and it's also one of the largest RV clubs in Australia. And the other thing I learned about Wylva is she seems to be a jack of all trades and is quite the doer in her organisation. So we're awesome to have you with us, Wylva.
Thank you.
Our second presenter is Cameron Wearing of Australian Driving Institute. Welcome, Cameron.
Good morning, everyone.
Cameron is Director of Research and Development and Head of Training for ADI, commencing in 1991. He's delivered 24 years of customised defensive training, utilised preventative techniques, discipline and behavioural safety training, and he's awesome in communicating and sharing. So great to have you with us, Cameron.
Thank you. And
joining our final presenter is also Michael Green of Pedders Suspension and Brakes. G'day, Michael.
Morning, team.
Michael's been with Pedders for nearly 18 years. Michael's currently Head of Sales and Operations for Pedders Queensland and is a seasoned GVM and load carrying expert. And once again, I find it incredible how you can articulate such a complex thing with maths and all sorts of stuff through in simple words. So awesome to have you with us.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to bust some myths, open it up. So over to you, Wylva.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wylva and I coordinate the RV Safe project. The project is funded by the federal government and is an initiative of the CMCA, the Campervan and Motorhome Club of Australia. And the project aims to improve RV road safety for all RVers. So starting off, most RV-related accidents are avoidable. There are 2 main things to keep in mind before you hit the road for the holidays, and that's to make sure that your vehicle is safe and to drive accordingly. So starting off, vehicle weight matters. Now, Michael from Pedders will explain vehicle weights in detail later on in the webinar, but I cannot stress enough how important it is. Weight will affect your vehicle's stability, and it's an important part of avoiding caravan sway. It will also affect your vehicle's braking and acceleration capabilities. An overweight vehicle can also avoid your insurance or see you get fined. It is your responsibility to make sure your vehicle is in limits, and Michael will explain what all this means later on in the webinar. Now, if you have a caravan, mirrors are often forgotten. Australian Design Rule 1402 rear vision mirrors states that you need to be able to see along the full length of your vehicle to a minimum distance of 20 metres. If your caravan is wider than your car, which most are, you'll end up with a blind spot as demonstrated by the red area in the diagram. Extendable mirrors or specialised towing mirrors are needed so you have the required field of vision. It is important to note that a camera cannot be substituted for mirrors. You will still need mirrors even for a short trip, and if you disconnect your caravan, you'll need to make sure you take those mirrors off or you fold in your extendable towing mirrors, otherwise you can get fined. Moving on to tyres. Tyres are all the contact you have between the road, so you need to look after them. Tyres degrade with age. Even if the tyre has plenty of tread on it, it mightn't be safe. Often RVs won't do as many kilometres as your passenger car, so it will appear that the tyres have plenty of tread, but they are old. Your location, weather conditions, and how you store your RV will all affect how quickly your tyres degrade. If your tyres are over 5 years old, we recommend that you have them checked by a professional. And if they're over 10 years old, just replace them. A tyre exploding on the highway is going to do a lot of damage to your RV, and it will wreck your holiday. The diagram shows you how to read your tyre wall. What I believe is the most important bit is understanding how to read the age of your tyre, which is demonstrated at point H. In this example, you can see that the last 4 digits shows what year the tyre was, well, what week and what year the tyre was made. So we have 4918, which means the 49th week of 2018. Tyre pressures are also really important, especially because the RVs are carrying more weight than your standard car. Check your tyre placard or your manufacturer for correct tyre pressures. Most caravans and campervans require a basic car licence. Once the vehicle exceeds a GVM or gross vehicle mass of 4.5 tonnes, you need to look at getting a light rigid licence. There are a few motorhomes that exceed light rigid and medium rigid licences. Interesting to note is licensing is based on the gross vehicle mass or GVM. So whilst your tow vehicle may have a GVM of 3 tonne, you can then tow with your car licence a caravan with a weight of 3 tonne. So this means you have a 6 tonne combination on the road with a car licence. But if you had a GVM of 4.5 tonne for your main vehicle, you need a truck licence. It's increasingly coming up in conversation that there needs to be a specialised licence for towing, as there's a lot more involved than driving a standard passenger car. Which leads me to my next point, training. If you're not experienced with towing, I highly recommend that you do a towing course. Cameron will run through some driving tips later on in the webinar. But if you're a newbie, it's very worthwhile to do a course. If you're travelling with a passenger, ensure that they're also able to drive the RV. This is great for fatigue management. Driving an RV is more strenuous than driving a passenger car, and you will get tired faster. It is also important to have a secondary driver in case of an emergency. I've heard far too many cases where the husband has fallen ill or injured, and he normally does all the driving. And all of a sudden, the wife needs to be able to drive the RV, and she can't, and they're stranded. I know this is based on a strong stereotype, but it exists nonetheless. I know we've been through lots of things to remember and to check to be safe when heading out in an RV, but it's totally achievable and fun. If you're new to RVing, do a course, then start with small trips. And when it comes to reversing, practice. Practice before you get to the caravan park in peak season and have an audience while you're learning to try to reverse for the first time. Go find a local car park or a paddock grassed area and head off early in the morning when there's no one around and go and practice. Another thing to take into consideration is speed. Your RV is heavier and it will take longer distances to stop and accelerate. Travel at a speed that is safe for you, your vehicle, and the conditions. If you're heading interstate, make sure you know the rules for the state. For example, in New South Wales, if your GVM or GCM is over 4.5 tonne, you are limited to 100 kilometres per hour. If you're towing in WA, you are limited to 100 kilometres per hour. Other state-based road rules apply, so it's worth doing a Google and checking out what's different before heading into another state. Something you may also not realise is that manufacturers may also place speed restrictions, so be sure to check your owner's manual. And finally, having a checklist is really helpful. RV Safe has developed an app called the RV Safe Checklist that can be found in both Apple and Android stores. A checklist will help you make sure you've done all those tasks before you head off. For example, make sure the jockey wheel's up, make sure the TV antenna's down, and that your electric brakes are functioning. There is a lot to remember, especially if you haven't been out for a while, so a checklist really helps. The RV Safe checklist is also customizable, so you can add or remove items to suit your vehicle, and it also includes a handy packing list. So I'm happy to take any questions before I hand over to Michael.
Awesome, thanks for that, Wylva. I'll start off with an easy one. On the checklist, is that something you do just at the very beginning of your journey or every time before you head off?
Every time you stop, you should go run through the checklist. You might need to check that your electric brakes are, calibrated correctly because you've only just pulled up for a short stop. But you'd want to make sure that, you've folded down your antenna or your jockey wheels up, or sometimes you can forget the most basic things. And it's worthwhile just running through and making sure you've ticked it all off. So
what are some of the things, like you mentioned the importance of both people driving and having the skills for that. Is that a common problem? Is it usually just a solo driver quite often?
Well, mostly couples are heading out in an RV, and we have this stereotype of where the husband does all the driving and then they fall ill. They trip and roll their ankle and they're unable to drive. And all of a sudden the wife needs to drive, she panics, they're stranded, they end up having to fly their son from another state just to get the RV home again. And it's avoidable because it's not too difficult to learn how to drive an RV. It's not too much of a challenge, don't be scared of it, just practice.
Awesome. Karen, Michael, any questions you'd like to throw at Wylva or from our audience at all?
No, just I found the oversized mirrors an interesting point. Quite often I see personally towing mirrors fitted to a car without the Caravan. Did not realise you can get a fine for that.
Yeah, so if the mirrors protrude too far from the vehicle, so you have 150 mil that you can protrude from the vehicle. Now, when you have the Caravan attached, it's fine to have the mirrors extended, but once you detach that, you can be protruding too far from your vehicle, and so you need to remove them or you can get fined.
Makes sense.
And there's a great comment here from Carl just saying, is it worth suggesting that people towing a Caravan for the first time start with a smaller Caravan? So instead of jumping straight to a big one, I guess.
Definitely. And if you're totally new to it, it's a good idea to hire a vehicle first, test it out, see what you think. You might hire a camper trailer or a small pop top. Give it a go before you go and spend big money on a big 3-ton Caravan, because you might find that you don't really need such a big vehicle.
Wylva, just a couple of points there. I have one question actually about your experience with people's insurance being risked. How often do you come across that?
It's not super common because it is difficult, I guess, to weigh everything if there is an accident, but it's starting to happen more often. So there is an example where there was a very large rollover where there was fatalities, and they picked up every single piece of that Caravan and weighed it. And not only were they charged for negligent driving and having an overweight vehicle, they also wouldn't have had insurance. Yeah. So it is possible, and it's just not worth doing it. If you read your insurance policy, you will see that you're not covered if your vehicle's overweight.
And Wylva, there's just a question here from Kim saying, just to reiterate, where do you find the RV checklist?
Just in the App Store, so either your Apple or Android, and just search for RV Safe Checklist, and it's a free app. Just download it and away you go.
I'll add that into the email, the circulating email as well tomorrow when it goes out. So we'll have a bit of a description to make sure you can find it nice and easy. Cameron, you have another question?
I had more of an anecdote just to back up Wylva's story about as a family member, my uncle, who was very insistent on doing all of the driving. My auntie was a perfectly capable driver. She grew up on a farm and could drive trucks. But she was not permitted to drive the Caravan and car combination. He unfortunately died of a heart attack on the spot, and she was stranded. And it was just a classic situation where if she had a little bit of practice, a bit of confidence, she was in a position to deal with things more readily. But same thing, 2 sons had to fly into regional New South Wales. It was completely avoidable. But from a training point of view, I couldn't agree more. We actually have cars and trailers that we, and unfortunately, it's generally the husband sending the wife in for training, and we train them up and to be competent with the trailer and a 4-wheel drive. And some of the times the techniques that we're teaching are different to what the husband has understood. And we've now think that the husband and wife should attend the training and understand the modern methods, the modern techniques, and be on the same page.
And just before we move on to you, Michael, just a quick point here from John. I thought it's a really interesting one. Will insurance companies assume full water tanks? Because some travellers may have just one tank empty due to weight restrictions.
So as long as you're within your maximum limits, and Michael will explain more about the weights, so as long as you're within your limits per the manufacturer, your insurance is going to be fine. But if you start exceeding what the manufacturer has said that the vehicle's designed to carry, that's when you're going to get into trouble.
I must admit, that's a great segue to you, Michael.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, team. As Jerome mentioned earlier, my name's Michael Green from Pedders. I am the Sales and Operations Manager, nearly 2 decades with the company, so I don't know anything other than steering, suspension, brakes and GVM and weight and how to manage it. So in my short presentation, we're going to touch on acronyms and legal compliance, the importance of trailer and vehicle selection, the effects of accessories when fitted to those vehicles, suspension travel, and braking efficiency and stopping distances. So all these points contribute to occupant safety. So we'll start with some terminology explained. So there's many vehicle and caravan weight terms, and it can be a bit of a minefield to try and understand the acronyms and what they actually mean. But the first one we can see there is tare weight. So tare weight, otherwise known as tare mass or unladen weight, is the original weight of the vehicle from the original manufacturer, with just your oil in the engine, your coolant in your cooling system, and only 10 litres of fuel in the fuel tank. Okay. The second one we will look at is curb weight. So similar to tare weight, so it's the weight of the car from the original manufacturer, but with a full tank of fuel. So not a lot of difference between the two, maybe 100, 150 kilos if you've got like a Land Cruiser or a Prado that's factory fitted with a secondary tank. The third one we'll look at is GVM, or gross vehicle mass. So gross vehicle mass is the maximum operating weight the vehicle as specified by the original manufacturer. So if a car manufacturer says this car can weigh 3,000 kilos maximum, you must not exceed that. So that includes the full tank of fuel and the occupants and any towable download. So the next one after that is payload. So payload is the difference between GVM and curb weight we mentioned earlier. It refers to the maximum allowable weight you can add to your vehicle in the form of accessories, people, and general cargo load. So this one's a good one. Front GALR. So GALR is gross axle load rating, sometimes known as gross axle weight rating, or I found another one the other day from another manufacturer, PAW, permissible axle weight. So as if it wasn't confusing enough, there's 3 terms just for the axle capacity. So obviously the axle capacity exists from the original manufacturer for a couple of reasons. Integrity of the suspension system, because if you exceed that, obviously, you may damage your vehicle. Then obviously you have rear gross axle load rating as well. More often than not, in a commercial type vehicle, the rating on the rear will be much higher because that's where most of the load goes. And then we add a RV or a caravan, and then we start talking about towable download. So towable download or towable mass is the maximum allowable weight or force the trailer can exert onto the tow hitch itself. ATM. So ATM is aggregate trailer mass. So it is the weight of the trailer when it's not coupled to a vehicle. So that would be the axle or axles if it's a tandem trailer, plus the jockey ball weight when the jockey wheel is on the ground. And then we have GTM, which is the weight of the caravan when it's attached to the tow vehicle. So those two are very similar. It's just that that jockey wheel weight is now distributed onto the tow vehicle itself. Towing capacities. So you'll always find there's two. So you've got unbraked capacity, which is 750 kilos, I think, as an ADR in Australia. And then each vehicle will have a braked towing capacity. In a modern commercial vehicle or a light commercial vehicle, you'll find that around 3.5 tonne or 3,500 kilos. Then our last acronym is GCM or gross combined mass. So gross combined mass is the maximum allowable weight of the trailer plus the tow vehicle and all of its load. So that's the contents of the passengers, the belongings to the passengers, any towable load, all the stuff you just put in the car when you go on a holiday. So an important note there regarding GCM, there's currently no federal government approved test to upgrade GCMs in Australia. Next slide, please. Okay. So here we're going to look at your typical tandem axle caravan, and this is referring to the appropriate caravan or vehicle selection. So we've learned that the average caravan in Australia has a payload of 400 to 500 kilos. So we'll have a look at the effects of accessories on a caravan. So here we're going to paint a picture. So we've got a caravan with a water tank, a toolbox on the back that we commonly see. We've got to fit the spare tyres somewhere because we're going across the country. One spare tyre's not enough, so we put a second one on there. We got the antenna there for the cricket. We got some air conditioning to make it a bit more comfortable for the family. Sorry. Toolbox out the front there. Put the gas tank in there and just make sure it's vented because that's the safety rule regarding gas tanks. But then we've got to add liquid, which is weight. So we add water to the water tank, which is commonly 90 to 180 litres, depending how many water tanks you have. Then we've got to add 9 kilos of gas, a gas bottle, bike rack, 4 or 5 bikes for the wife and kids. The wife wants to throw in all these fluffy pillows and some window coverings as well. And then by the time we add our food and our beer, you can see how quickly that payload diminishes on the caravan. So I think most would agree that 400 to 500 kilos we started with, I reckon by now we've used all that payload. So it's just something to be conscious of when you're loading up your caravan. What do you really need to take? So when it comes to vehicle selection, we're going to examine the ever popular Toyota Land Cruiser 200 series. Now, many people might be shocked to learn that the payload on this particular car is only 710 kilos. So let's have a look and see what happens to the Land Cruiser when we add the accessories. So as mentioned, we have 710 kilos of payload. So let's add a bull bar, and you can see that drops. We'll add a winch as well. Some spotlights. We'll throw a CB antenna on there. Some underbody protection. Some side steps and scrub rails. Put a roof rack on there. I think I've never seen a 200 series without a roof rack. So we've got the high lift jack. We're going to go bush and put some spare jerry cans full of fuel up there and a couple of spare tyres. And you can see how quickly that payload reduces. We've got a cargo barrier in there. We've got some drawers in the back. Add the fridge, your tow hitch and your weight distribution, because that is weight. And we're down to 209 kilos. Now, you've probably observed that we've got no people in the car yet. Okay, so we've got no people and we've got no towable load from the caravan or from the trailer. So this would probably be a great candidate for a GVM upgrade to make the car compliant in terms of weight and weight management. So hopefully that clears that up. The other thing we need to be aware of is we often look at the GVM ratings of a vehicle, and then we look at the towing capacity of the vehicle. Now, majority of the time, when we add those two figures together, that does not necessarily add up to the stated GCM or gross combination mass allowable. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that if we had that commercial vehicle loaded up to 3,000 kilos, our towing capacity is not 3,500 kilos. It's now actually 2,650 because we must not exceed the GCM. Now, if we flip it over and we have a caravan that weighs 3,500 kilos, our tow vehicle can now only weigh 2,150 because we must not exceed that GCM of 5650. And I can tell you now that Hilux, if we looked at the Hilux, would weigh about 2,100 kilos dry. So that's the importance of weight. Now, we'll just briefly touch on suspension travel. So this is a real life scenario. This actually turned up in one of our workshops, complaining of poor steering and poor braking. I reckon you can almost guess that's overloaded. So we actually weighed it, and compared to its GCM of 5885, it came in at 7,208 kilos, which is absolutely massive. So 1,300 kilos overloaded, which is about the size and weight of a small hatchback. And right here, I think I've got a short video. Sorry, next slide, yep. So regarding suspension travel, these are some common accessories we might add to the vehicle. So a bull bar and winch on the front might weigh up to about 100 kilos. 130 kilos worth of accessories such as a dual battery system, your oil catch can, that sort of stuff, your antenna, your red arc battery system. And you can see the front suspension starting to sag or reduce suspension travel or lose ground clearance. Also, if we put a moderate towable load of 100 kilos on the back and 200 kilos worth of cargo in the ute space, I think you would agree that's probably not a lot of weight. But what we're seeing is the suspension's compressing and it's losing its range of motion. And I think the next slide has a short video that demonstrates the bump stop bottoming out on the chassis. So that, number one, creates an uncomfortable ride. And number two, the suspension's not working the way it's intended, okay? So uncomfortable, unsafe, and not fit for purpose if the car was loaded up to the hilt. And finally, we'll take a quick look at braking efficiency and distance. So we conducted some testing here with your typical dual cab, which is a all-day Australian family car in 2021. And we found at 60 kilometres an hour, the average stopping distance was 13.4 metres. When we added a loaded Caravan to that, that increased to 29.1 metres, so more than double. We ran the same test again at 80 kilometres an hour, and our average stopping distance was 23.8 metres. Add the Caravan to the back, and we're now at 51.8. So once again, more than double more than double of a unloaded ute. So you add that Caravan to the back, and the stopping distances tremendously increases. And then our final test at 100 kilometres an hour, the average stopping distance was 37 metres. Add the Caravan to the back, nearly 100 metres to stop the car and the Caravan combined. So quite alarming, and a lot of us probably don't realise that when we drive to and from work, we sort of have a natural feel of how hard to push the brake pedal because it's going to take X metres to stop. But we often forget when we're towing a 3.5 tonne van on the back, that stopping distance is far greater than what you're commonly used to. So hopefully that clearly demonstrates the distances there.
Awesome, thank you, Michael. There's a question in the chat from Greg. What about the fifth wheelers? How are they measured against the tow vehicle?
That's interesting. The fifth wheelers, we don't see a lot of them in Queensland, which is interesting. So we obviously participate with other government organisations weighing vans and cars combined. But I envision that they manage the weight a lot better because it's placed more over the axle. So when you have a similar weight placed on the tow hitch itself, it has a leverage effect on the axle housing. So, for example, if I put 200 kilos on the tow hitch, it would normally equate to approximately 250, maybe 300 kilos on the rear axle, just because you have that leverage effect. But when you've got that weight further forward and distributed between the front and rear axles, it manages the weight a lot better. But we still need to keep in mind that we still have a payload limit. And more often than not, those fifth wheelers are generally heavier than your average Caravan.
Awesome, and a point we should probably make, I guess, the stopping conditions. When you're stopping, that's probably in your ideal conditions, is it?
Those tests would have been on a racetrack, so a very well prepared surface. So you need to factor in poor road conditions, wet weather, the sun shining in your eyes, the reaction times, the load variations between different rigs. So there's plenty of variables there.
Remember, when we were recording this, you were talking around how sometimes you're at the shoulders of the roads, you have good and bad, and you can drift off a little bit, and the impacts that can have on it.
Yeah, well, I anticipate that most people would take evasive action in an emergency braking situation and would tend to pull to the left to avoid oncoming traffic, where you'd put half your road wheels onto gravel, which is a loose surface. And once again, that would extend your braking distances because you haven't got the traction like a well-prepared bitumen surface.
And another point you made in there when you're talking around reaction time, and just for those who have sat in some of our webinars, it's interesting because with the impairments, 1 in 25 Australians don't actually read the prescriptions of their drugs. And you may be feeling fine when you're going in a straight line, but impairment can be fatigue or prescription medications. Even antihistamines can slow your reaction time and it somewhat impair you. And that can then drag out the stopping distance even further.
Oh, yeah, of course. I think Cameron and ADI have done some further research around that.
Yes. Well, I mean, the absolute minimum, Michael, is that when you look at the experiment that you've done, that's best conditions and the driver is prepared for an emergency. So you eliminate the reaction time, and at 100 kilometres an hour, you're doing nearly 30 metres a second. So you need to add 30 metres to your final number there, which takes you to 110, including reaction time, no doubt. It is a point of interest, though, that when you're talking split surface scenarios of gravel on the left axle and tarmac on the right axle, we actually teach how to deal with that. We actually teach people how to be in that position and how to stop in that position. And it's not as bad as it sounds. It's actually a safe thing to learn to do. It's a skill that we're not taught here in Australia, but it is especially in Scandinavia. And but reaction time is always forgotten about, and people always underestimate that their reaction time will be slower when they're not prepared for an emergency, and their braking will be less efficient. So the numbers that you're quoting are the best they'll ever be.
Yeah, and I guess the other element there is a lot of us using cruise control. I think we get a bit relaxed and a bit more comfortable, so that would increase reaction time as well.
Yes, but the problem there is also, where do their feet go when you apply cruise control? Where do your feet go? And one of the catastrophic mistakes that people make is they pull their feet back, which is actually illegal, by the way, but you can't get fined because the police can't see your feet. But it's not demonstrating proper control. But it's a crazy thing to do, is remove your feet from the pedals.
Agreed.
Wylva, do you have any questions at all for Mike?
Not a question, but I would just like to reiterate with the weights. If you don't know what your vehicle weights are and you're unsure, go get your vehicle weighed. So you can either go to a public weigh bridge, or there's a lot of mobile weighing stations now, and get your vehicle weighed, because you might have different accessories, especially if you bought it secondhand. Your Caravan's tear weight mightn't be what was stamped on it because different things have been added. Get it weighed, find out what you've got. If you need to adjust things, you can, but it's not expensive. It's fairly easy to organise these days. So just go get it weighed.
And even part of your journey management, you may not need all those things you have inside your vehicles as well. And the statement I think you guys are making, everyone loves a bag of firewood for good measure.
Yeah.
And when you go and get your vehicle weighed, pack it completely ready for your trip, all your gear and all your passengers. You're going to have to bring your family along for the weighing day as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Wylva. So over to you, Cameron.
Oh, well, thank you and good morning. This sort of really leads on from Wylva and Michael, and I'm going to reiterate here that we call it, when you're driving with the Caravan at 100 kilometres an hour, you're essentially managing 40 tonnes. So you need to imagine that you're actually driving the weight of a B-double. So it all starts with posture, would you believe? So this is the beginning of understanding and managing your stability, which is absolutely crucial when you're dealing with such a heavy vehicle. So what we start with is understanding that feet, legs and backrest are the things that you need to address. Your feet, you need to be close enough that your feet naturally fall onto a footrest. We actually call it a foot brace because it helps to brace your body. The legs can go wide around the steering wheel, not driving with your knees clamped together. And the backrest will generally be at around 110 degrees. When you start driving at this level of perfection with such a perfect seating position, and I'll talk about steering directly, it's actually really difficult to maintain for more than 2 hours to drive at such a high standard. So with steering, you're talking about direction and stability. So for example, if you have your hands at equal points on the wheel at 9 and 3 on the wheel, with your thumbs wrapped around the wheel, which is contrary to what used to happen prior to the 1990s, that your hand will be at 9 and 3. Your thumb is now wrapped around the wheel to be used as it should be, as an opposable digit, and it takes less effort to keep your hands there. And next, and arms bent up to 90 degrees. So you're actually sitting quite a bit closer, and you've got good purchase on the wheel with a very healthy bend in your arms. Decades ago, you had straight arms and 10 and 2. So 10 and 2 finished in about 1986. Never, ever, ever place one hand at 12 o'clock on the wheel when you're driving forward. At speeds above 60 kilometres an hour, having your hand at 12 on the wheel means that a steering input is generally going to be unbalanced, unsupported, and too fast. The most terrifying thing is that when you're driving at high speed, at let's say 100 kilometres an hour, and if you have a bit of a fright, that can turn into a very, very big steering input, and it's too rapid, which results in an oscillation through to the caravan, and before you know it, you've incited your own sway. The other thing you need to consider is airbags in modern vehicles, that if your hand is positioned up around 10 and 2 or up at 12 o'clock, that if you have airbag detonation, there's no predicting where your hand's going to go. The worst scenario is that it hits you in the face, which means you're going to punch yourself in the face at 200 kilometres an hour, which is generally unsurvivable. Another big problem is wind shear. I've experienced this quite a few times, and particularly on flat areas like Hay Plain or driving between Winton and Longreach and so forth. But wind shear is a sudden change in velocity where you have force, and then in this case, the truck takes that force away. So now you don't have the wind shear. The second problem is that you now get force around, like a big positive pressure around the front of the truck. Then that becomes a negative pressure, and then you experience wind shear again once the truck goes past you. So that's 3 major events in a matter of seconds that can initiate sway. You need to be mentally prepared as you approach every single truck, if you're experiencing any kind of side force with wind, that this truck will upset your balance. So you need to be mentally prepared, hands on the wheel, look down the road, and be prepared for it. Electric brakes are an absolutely fantastic addition to a vehicle. I can't think of any other braking system which surpasses this. You have a dial, that dial or potentiometer, you can increase and decrease braking effort. As you change the weight of your vehicle, you have to adjust your brakes. So if it's full, it's up at around, I don't know, 7 is a number I would start with. And then if it's empty, you could be down as low as 4. But the idea is that as you're rolling out a driveway and just doing 10 kilometres an hour, apply your brakes, and the unit should brake with the car. So you have braking in unison. And the final one that a lot of people don't know about is that most of these electric brake systems have the capacity to use the trailer brakes independently by pushing that button in. So the position of this potentiometer is absolutely crucial, that you can intuitively put your hand onto that button if you do experience sway, and apply the trailer brakes alone, and then that will eliminate the sway almost immediately. Overtaking. Look, I'm going to tell you now, I don't think you should, but it's the riskiest intentional act you'll make on an open road. You're intentionally driving down the wrong side of the road. The minimum time you should allow for people traveling at normal speeds is 50 seconds and 1,500 meters. That is the shortest it's going to be. As this is happening, you need to have a planned escape. Now, dynamic planning means that it's changing as you go, because you've got all sorts of things coming up towards you. You have to allow for wind shear as you go past the truck, let's say. And once you're committed to overtaking, don't look down at your speed. If you're already speeding, you're just going to have to take that on the chin, but don't look at your speed. Use your senses to estimate your speed, because your focus has to be looking down the road, aiming down the road, and not looking at the truck, but paying attention to what's coming up towards you. But ideally, don't overtake. Fatigue is a way bigger problem than people give it credit for. The older you get energy depletion. Your 2-hour ebb and tide going in and out of energy will have greater dips. Things like in your diet, very, very important to remember. There's a chemical called tryptophan which occurs in protein, particularly in turkey, and it's a sedative. Processed foods take more effort to digest, and so that takes away energy. And energy foods and drinks will ramp you up and drop you. So these are not smart things to have when you're doing long distance driving. And the final one is the mid-afternoon siesta. Look, you're on holidays, make the most of that. You have a natural circadian low, depending on your lifestyle, between 1 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Maximise that. If you're in hot conditions, it's a natural time to have a bit of a snooze, but really plan around having a siesta. And what I like about it is that I find that I get up reasonably early, I have a big day, I have a small snooze, and then roll into the evening, and I find that my evening snooze or my evening sleep is shorter when I have an afternoon snooze. And of course, share the driving. Wildlife. There's a lot of interesting stuff about wildlife. There's a few things that we know. One of the interesting things that we know is that theoretically, 75% of all kangaroo strikes are avoidable. And I can expand on that later. But you have increased risk at night, increased risk for 2 hours at dawn, 1 hour at dusk, and there's an 80% increase in kangaroo strikes when there's a full moon. And that was actually worked out through the CSIRO and the insurance agencies. I don't know why. And then speed. The assessments done around people hitting wildlife is that they generally hit the kangaroo at 60 kilometres an hour when their initial speed was 100. If you've got heightened, increased kangaroo strike possibility, you've driven past a sign, you've got paddock on one side and trees on the other, or low-lying areas or carcasses on the road, we find that doing 80 kilometres an hour means that you can actually pull up in time and not even hit the kangaroo. And if you have high risk, we recommend not fitting steel bars. We fit polycarbonate. We've done the testing on them and they're incredible. Thank you. Now, when a caravan does sway, it's often initiated by the driver somehow. It could be through loading, but when it does happen, you have a very, very small window in order to correct it. Most people hang on and hang on and hang on and try and save it. You actually have to fix it on the first sway. So the instant you feel any type of oscillation occurring through the trailer, you must react on the very first one, release the power, and your steering has to be quite accurate and fast to make sure that you keep on heading down the road. And you'll find that on the second, it'll slow down and the third sway will go away. Otherwise, you spin on the third sway. Acceleration, theoretically, is a temporary fix, because theoretically, by accelerating, you pull the unit straight. But also, these oscillations also occur from speed. So by increasing the speed, you're also increasing the likelihood of that oscillation returning. So you have electric brakes, hit the button. That's all you need to do. Hit the button and the thing will straighten up. Eventually you must brake. So you do this gradually and gently, and the whole show will slow down because speed is an initiator. You reduce speed and that problem goes away. If you do lose control, God help you, that's an awful scenario. Just absolutely stand on the brakes. And if you're sliding down the road and into the bush, your brake pedal's your last friend. Just stand on the brakes, let ABS do its thing, just let the technology roll, and God forbid that you should roll over. But generally, a rollover is a fairly passive event. It looks exciting, but it's a fairly passive event. And once the car finishes rolling, your foot's still on the brake pedal, turn the engine off, and make sure you're all okay. Engage technology, guys. If you have the opportunity to engage technology, especially with stability controls and anti-yaw and these types of things, engage in it. It will act sooner and faster, more accurately than the human can. And just some tips. You need to do these things consistently. Only use good technique, good driving technique, good steering technique. Learn to maneuver. This is something that a training organisation can help you with. Often this is done incorrectly, by the way, and I'll allude to that more in a minute. Share the load. You both need to be as competent as each other for most driving scenarios. We would say that you need to be a 7 out of 10. Now, understanding the average driver in Australia, according to the United Nations, we are considered a 4 out of 10. So your driving actually needs to be dramatically better than the average driver around you. Don't overload. There's an exponential effect when you overload. Our go-to people are Pedders. If you have a problem, go talk to Pedders, they'll give you the right direction, and they're also obliged to give you the legal answers. Speed is relative to conditions and not the zone. Or because it says 100 and you're allowed to do 100 doesn't mean it makes sense to do 100. Speed is relative. We can thank Einstein for that little bit of help there. So if it's too fast and you're driving faster than you can keep up with mentally, slow down. Brake often, smell the roses. I'm going to go back to this again. This relates to fatigue. You're on holidays. Enjoy the opportunity to stop and have a stretch. Age is experience, but there's a lot of things that degrade as you get older. Vision is one, fatigue is another, but also the one that you can't measure is complacency. Complacency is the biggest one. And what we see as complacent is someone driving down a road with a hand at 12 o'clock on the wheel with the car-trailer combination. Now, one of the things about reversing, which I'll just quickly add to there, is, and this is going to sound a little bit sexist, but women have got better peripheral vision, their eyes work differently to men, their attitudes are also different and way more passive. But one of the handy things to do, if you want to teach your wife or girlfriend to, or partner, to learn to reverse, do it first by learning to reverse by looking over your shoulder. By looking over your shoulder, you can far more clearly analyse and articulate what's going on behind you, and then convert that into doing it through your mirrors. We find that very, very successful, and the reversing manoeuvres that we do, we get them to look over their shoulder and treat the tow ball like it's, or rather the trailer or caravan, like it's a wheelbarrow. And that seems to be a decent way to get around it. Use a big car park somewhere, take your time, get it wrong, and then eventually, once you're comfortable looking over your shoulder, then engage with the mirrors. Most of all, enjoy the journey as much as the destination, but please don't have too much faith in your own driving. That's a big mistake. Even as a professional and as a trainer, you've got to be constantly working at it because we're simply not built to do it. Are there any questions?
Awesome, thanks for that, Cam. And just to point on that, the way it works in road safety is everyone has good days and everyone has bad days, and we talk around the system of protecting them. And even the best car racers will have days when they're not performing as well. And it's just recognising that in your own sort of limits. When you do have those, take a break, step up, be aware, self-regulate a little bit more.
Look, we aren't born to do it. I think if I could just briefly say, Jerome, that like a safety gap that you should have in traffic, that's an academic number. It's not intuitive. So a lot of people would suggest that a 2-second gap is sensible. When you look at 60 kilometres an hour, you're doing 16 metres per second. It'll take roughly 15 metres to pull up. If you have a magic reaction time of 1 second, that means 16 metres is used up for reaction, 15 metres is used up to stop. And we're talking about a normal sedan, empty vehicle, not towing anything. And so that figure comes to 31 metres combined. But a 2-second gap is 2 times 16, so it's only 32 metres. So a 2-second gap is mathematically achievable, but I challenge anyone to actually carry that out properly, and that's why minimum 3 seconds at all speeds, absolute minimum of 3 seconds. And understand that that gap is going to be big enough that will allow a truck in, but that's just how the physics works. The big mistake the human makes is that our intuitive gap, would you believe, is about 1.5 to 1.2 seconds from the vehicle that they follow, which means they're going to hit them at a very high speed if that car does an emergency stop. And a 40k crash, which is what it will be, is a big hit.
I don't know, well, when you do hit someone, that, as Cameron mentioned, the joys of physics and energy. So if you have a loose item in your car and you come to a rapid stop at 60 k's for a crash, a 1 kilogram bottle of water changes to 20 kilograms. So awesome. There's a question here from Debbie. Would electric brakes be beneficial for a 19-foot RV?
This is so we're not towing now, it's 1 unit?
Debbie, would you mind just clarifying? Is an RV, I guess, is one entire vehicle, isn't it? One unit, yes.
No, just the standard hydraulic system will be absolutely sufficient. That would have been tested to an inch of its life and certified. The electric brakes referring to a Caravan with an independent braking system. Typically, in the past, you'd find that would be an inertia or hydraulic braking system. The electronic braking system is vastly superior, but you must adjust it.
Fantastic. Wylva, Michael, any questions for Cara at all? Or statements?
Well, I was just thinking about the wildlife, and when you have a kangaroo in front of you and you've got a Caravan on and you're at speed, do you think you're better off hitting the kangaroo than doing evasive steering action? Because you may just roll yourself over if you take too hard a steering action.
The average Australian, respectfully, doesn't possess the skills to manoeuvre generally and survive it. It's something that's taught in Scandinavia, is to actually how to get around a moose at 80 kilometres an hour when you get your licence. So that's part of their licensing process. Typically in Australia, we say don't swerve, and that means that most people will say, in that case, I'll just hit it. I would be more inclined that if you have an unavoidable scenario developing in front of you, have a bit of a self-effacing look on that after the event. Say, what did I do wrong leading up to it? Didn't I pay attention to the messages and apply it next time? But to answer your question, the preparation for that would be firstly having a polycarbonate bar fitted, not steel or aluminium. The science is overwhelming there, by the way, to fit polycarbonate and hit it at the lowest possible speed. You hear anecdotes of kangaroos coming through windows and so forth. In 20 years, I've only seen that happen once. And if you've got polycarbonate, the damage won't be referred back to the car as easily as it is with steel. But hit it. If you're going to hit anything, hit it always at the lowest possible speed. And unless you're skilled and trained, I wouldn't be engaging in swerving around.
I've hit multiple animals in my life and just gone straight through and tried to wash the speed off. So questions here from Tony. First one, can electric brakes be fitted to lighter trailers and caravans? Is there an advantage?
Yes, and yes, they can be retrofitted. You can even have ABS retrofitted. And yes, they're a better system, so therefore they're advantageous.
Actually, I have seen the Bosch ABS when it first got launched, when they were testing out in a racetrack, and I must admit, it was a super impressive technology to see.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
So,
if your trailer's over 2 tonne, you have to have electric brakes, but there's nothing stopping you adding them if it's lighter than the 2 tonne.
A question here from Carl. Do you deal with the effects of passing B-doubles in a motorhome in the same way as with a Caravan?
Yes, absolutely. You're carrying a big sail behind you. You can experience yaw through wind shear when you get a larger vehicle. And the problem with an RV is that it's not particularly heavy given the sail area that it's carrying, so they can be particularly unstable. But you'll feel that on a highway when you're getting a side wind. And Mercedes have actually got a really good side wind and wind shear system, which I tested going over the was it Balti Bridge, I think it was. And the wind shear was so significant that the car actually initiated steering inputs to keep it in its lane. Nothing to do with lane keeping technology, all to do with wind shear.
And if you are out and about and you do and a truck does come up on you, look, best thing is slow down, pull over and give it way. And you'll be in their good books well and truly. There's no point in trying to be stubborn and saying, well, I'm on the road. Safest thing you can do is give them way.
If you've probably got a UHF, the open channel, which is often referred to the truckies channel, if you're in for some colourful discussion, you can leave it on, but often having it on and just in the background, if you see a truck coming up behind you, you can alert them. There's nothing wrong with indicating left. And as you indicate left, just roll off the power. The truck drivers are actually quite professional. They'll see that and they'll take that opportunity and around they'll go. I think if you're inviting it, I mean, these people have got a job to do. They're often on a bit of a mission. You don't. You're just sort of idling off to the next location. And I think a bit of courtesy there, just to let them get on with their job, is the right thing to do as well.
And last question here, because we're just about out of time, is from Kim. You mentioned that most kangaroo hittings can be avoided. Is that by reducing speed, avoiding early morning and dusk? Is there anything else?
Mental capacity has a great deal to do with it. The having a plan that you're going to drop your speed to the point that you can actually deal with things. I should point out, I made pains to point out rather, that 75% of incidences with striking kangaroos are theoretically avoidable. In reality, it's probably closer to 50%, because you're dealing with an animal that's thinking independently, and that's what mucks the formula up a little bit. But at the end of the day, if you're ticking boxes, and with the corporate organisations that we deal with, the kangaroo strikes that they have are almost boring, because it's the same thing again and again and again. They're in a high-speed area, and being an investigator for crashes, you're looking for three things. So you're in a high-speed area, let's say 100, and you're doing 100. You're doing it in the morning or in the evening when there's a high probability. Cruise control's been applied, so now we've got three things going. So you're just exposing yourself through driving. The feet are pulled away from the pedals. You've got a hand at 12 o'clock on the wheel. So we would argue you're doing nothing to actually contribute to reducing the likelihood. You take away cruise control, you put both hands on the wheel, you have some mental preparation going, and drop your speed a touch. At least you're making an effort.
Awesome. And the other thing is, if you are going to visit friends in the country or other areas, recommendation from country kids, call them up and ask them, are there areas on the way you're going to be wary of? Because country people will know where the dangerous zones are. If you see a watering point around, they can, especially at twilight or morning, those things, or even carcasses, they can sort of be forewarnings that you are in areas where there are risks. So absolutely fantastic, guys. Thank you so much for today. Wylva, Cameron and Michael, absolutely awesome having you guys join us and sharing your wealth of knowledge and working collaboratively on this. So this will be shared, and it'll be featuring our newsletter. Will go out, and we'll put, and you'll get an email tomorrow linking you back to it all. I have some questions for Wylva, so I'll link you up as well with one of the people who was trying to get onto your app. So that's really it for 2021 for the NRSP this year. We have a number of webinars planned for next year. We actually have a very cool one we're going to be doing in February around the power of breathing and improving road safety from Sonia. She's over and she's going to come through and share it. There'll also be a number of other ones we'll be doing. So thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you in 2022. And please make sure you travel you're safe over the summer period. And I hope we have a great one and everyone can do it interstate.
Safe and enjoyable Christmas.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.